Hello, today we're going to create a nice model of this shaft here. There's a little shaft with a radial hole pattern and a keyway. This goes with one of the projects that my students work on. And in the second part of this, I'm also going to give a tutorial on how to create this drawing. I will tell you the drawing we create will look different than this because, to be completely honest, this is not a very good drawing. But we will use some of the same techniques that these folks used to create this drawing. So let me move this to the other screen. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to hit new, and then I'm just going to name my part. My students will name this differently, but I'll just for now name this thing shaft and hit OK. Okay, so I'm in my shaft part. I'm going to turn on all my planes. All right, and the first stage, because it's a round part, is I want to create a revolve. So I'm going to hit revolve. And I'm going to use some shortcuts here. I'm not going to always go up to the top and click things. I'm going to hold right click, define in Turtle Sketch. I like to keep my cursor around the center of my screen as much as possible because it just saves time. Over time, moving your cursor back and forth across the screen adds up. So if you get the habit of using all these right-click menus, that'll save you a lot of time down the road. So for me, I'm picturing this as my front view, or my primary view likely being the one that they show as a right side view here. Although this isn't a bad front view either. So maybe we'll stick with what they did actually. So in that case, my front view is going to have to go across this way. So I'm actually going to have to draw on my front plane. So I can either hover over it and click it, or I can pick it over here. So I'm just going to click my front plane, make sure right. Yeah, that sounds good. That's how I want it oriented. I'm going to hit sketch, and then if yours didn't rotate, just hit this button right up here, and that'll rotate my sketch. Now I need to create the revolve profile. The way that and you can tell by the way that it's drawn here, I'll zoom in a little bit, the way that they created it, they use this center flat surface here of the flange as the main center of their whole dimensioning scheme. So that kind of indicates to me, if I'm making this part and someone gives me a drawing like this, that's probably the surface that these holes are used to bolt this part to something else. So I'm going to stick with what they're saying because I probably want to keep my plane in the center then, so I can use that plane to assemble it down the road if I was to assemble this in a larger assembly. So I'm going to first go up to line, then I'm going to go on my reference line here. This is my top plane right now, and this is actually my right plane because we're rotated a little bit. So here's my right, it lines up with that. Here's my top, it lines up with that reference line. So I'm going to create a line, and I go up, click up, over, and then I'm going to go up a little more, and I'm not going to pay attention to any of the constraints that it infers because I want to go through that and make sure we understand how to change those things. But I'm not going to pay attention to that, other than you can see I have a V right there, horizontal and vertical. Okay, so I'm going to click, I want a vertical line. Now I'm going to go over to horizontal, and I'm going to come over to here. There's my surface for where I'm going to bolt the flange. I'm going to go up. I'm going to go over, and if I have an L right now, that's fine. I don't care. I'm just, I only care about the horizontal at the moment. Then I'm going to come back down, and actually these two lines line up. So if I try to draw this about the same length, you can see those L's pop up there. And I'm going to go over, then down, click, over, down one more time, and then back to the beginning. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to middle click a couple times. That'll bring me back to this arrow. And since I closed my sketch, make sure to create this line when you create a revolve. People forget this all the time. Make that line in the center because you have to close the sketch up so it can revolve this around and make it solid. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to go in and delete all these L's. So I'm going to delete that one, click it, delete it. That got rid of a constraint that made this line and this line equal. This one, see, as I hover over it, it highlights this one. It also highlights this one down here. I'm I'm going to delete those, even though that one's not necessarily wrong, but I'm going to show you how I would constrain it. This one's not necessarily wrong either, but I'm going to go ahead and delete them anyways. Not a bad idea to get rid of your equal lengths unless you intended to do them. And then if I want to make, so these two diameters on the end are going to be the same, and these two are going to be the same. So the way I would like to constrain that, and make sure to use your constraints as much as possible. Once I create my first sketch, I'm going to constraints next after I delete any of them that I'm not sure if I need. I know I need my horizontals and my verticals, but I didn't necessarily need all those equal lengths. So constraints are the next step because we're going to eliminate a lot of dimensions we don't need. So I like this horizontal constraint right now because these two lines need to be horizontally in line with each other. So I can pick this line, or this point, sorry, and this point, and now those are horizontal. And now if I change this dimension, it's going to move both of these. I'm going to do the same thing with this point and this point right here. Now these two diameters are the same. Okay, so now I've said that these two flanges, these two diameters are equal. These two diameters are equal. I think that's probably pretty good for now. So now I just need to add the dimensions I need. So if I'm dimensioning this thing, I'm going to need a diameter dimension. Oh, and you know what? I forgot a major point. I need to create a center line. I can either create it with this, or I can pick this one. They do exactly the same thing. And I'm going to go down here, and I'm going to put a center line on that line that goes through the center of my part. And then I'll middle click to get out of there. All right, so now I have a center line for this thing to revolve around. Okay, and if you're not sure if a line is your axis of revolution or the center of your revolve, just pick the line, hold right click, designate axis of revolution. Okay, and hit OK. So now I can add some dimensions in. So I'm going to go dimension. I'm going to go up to this line on the side here. I'm going to pick the line. I'm going to pick the center line. Notice how I go to the left so I don't accidentally pick that other line I have right here. Pick the center line, and then go back and pick this line again. Then over on the left here, I'm going to middle click. And now that gives me a diameter dimension. And for my drawing, that's better because I'm going to use the dimensions that I used to model this thing. Because if I'm dimensioning a circle or an arc that's 180 degrees or greater, the standards or ANSI standards say I need to give a diameter. So I need that diameter dimension right there. I'm not going to change it right now. I'm just putting it there so I have it. So then I'm going to go over to this line up here. I'm going to pick that one, go over here, pick the center line again, pick that line again, then middle click over here. Now I've got my second diameter. Now my third diameter is going to be this outside one, so I'm going to pick that line. I can come over to the right this time. Doesn't matter. I could have went over here. Pick the center line, pick the flange line again. And what we're doing when we do that, by the way, is saying I'm measuring from the outside of a circle to the center of the circle to the outside of the circle, which is really the definition of a diameter. From the although typically it's from one outside point to the center, then to an opposite outside point. But this is how we do it in Creo for a revolve feature, since we don't have that other outside point down here. Okay, so now I've got that dimension in. Now the next dimensions I think I'm going to need, I probably want a flange width. I have it right here, but I'm going to add it in. I'll pick that line, middle click. Okay, and then maybe I want a dimension to this shoulder here, and I probably want to go from my mounting surface, so I'm going to go from this line to this vertical line over here, and then middle click up there just to keep it out of the way. I like to middle click away from the part, so if someone else ever works on my model, they're not coming into just a whole bunch of dimensions over the top of each other, not knowing where anything goes. Of course, they can move it around, but I like to space it out because then when I show it in my drawing, it's going to show up kind of nicely laid out like this, and then I can just move things around, do some final touches. So then we'll dimension to the end as well, so we'll go from the end here to the mounting surface right here, and then middle click above. And then we'll do from this mounting surface here to this shoulder, middle click up here, and then I need an overall dimension as well. I could put it at the bottom, I could put it at the top, really doesn't matter. I'll put it at the bottom because I got a little room. So I'm going to go from that right side to that left side, middle click below. Now I've got all the dimensions I think I need. I'll zoom out a little bit, and now I can start scaling them down. So what I'm going to do is draw a big box around everything, because right now my numbers are humongous. And if I was to change one of these to the dimension it needs to be, so for example, this diameter is going to be 0.6. Look at that. It's like that diameter is non-existent. It's going to be hard to figure out what I need to change next. So what I like to do is do an overall scale to bring the whole thing kind of down to a smaller size. So I'm going to make sure I'm on my arrow up here, and I can just middle click a couple times to make sure. Then I'm going to draw a big box around all the dimensions, turn them all green. Then I'll hold right click, go to modify, which brings up my modify box, and then I'm going to hit lock scale. Okay, now what I can do is I can click in a box, all right, and it will highlight over here which dimension it is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick one that's a little bit different than just the top one, because yours may be in a different order than mine. So let's scroll down. Let's find the one that says 530. All right, so we can change the overall width of this thing. I'm going to make sure lock scale's on, like I said earlier. And then the overall width of this part is 7.5. So I hit enter. Oh my God, where did my part go? It's tiny. That's what we wanted to have happen though. And we're going to hit OK. And it's going to zoom in, and now look at all these dimensions. These are a lot smaller. So now if I change this dimension over here to the right number, 0.6, I can still see my diameter, which is good. So that one's going to be 0.6. This one out here, the slightly larger diameter, is 0.75. Now my part's starting to take a little shape. This guy over here to this shoulder is going to be 3. This one here is going to be 2. The width of my flange is 0.5. And the width to the right is 4. And the last dimension I have is my overall flange diameter, which is 3. All right, so now I've created my whole sketch. I have diameter dimensions. I have all the dimensions I'm going to want for my drawing. So I can hit the checkbox. And what we can see is this thing rotates around to create the shaft. Okay, just to show you what happened, if I made this like 180 degrees, it took my little section here on the top and it rotated around to create the solid. So 360 will fill a full circle. So now I can go up here. You can see it says I have an internal center line. I like to do that personally because it means you don't have to have an additional axis, but that's personal preference. I like to keep my axis inside, which is what we did with the center line. So I'm going to hit checkbox, and now here's the shaft. So if I hit my standard orientation, here's what it looks like. I'm also going to turn on my edges to make things a little easier to see. Now if we look at this part, the next most prominent feature here, well, we can say the bolt pattern, we could say the keyway. Let's make the keyway first because that one's a little more complex. So the keyway is 0.4 deep and 0.1 wide. Here's how I would do that. We want to cut the key into this through the top. I can double click my feature and see that the diameter there was 0.6, okay, which means the radius is 0.3. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm just going to hit regen so it goes away, is I'm going to create an extrude, and we're going to bury a datum inside there that sits right at the top of our cylinder. So what I can do once I'm in an extrude is I can also go back to that model tab up here, and when I click that, you notice how it keeps my datums on, because this is a very good practice to put a datum inside of a feature so it's not in the way for any of your other features. So I'm going to hit plane. I'm going to pick my top plane here, and I'm going to say I want that to be 0.3 above the axis, and you can see that puts a tangent right on top of this cylinder here. So I'm going to hit OK, and I'll go back to extrude, and now it's going to assume, okay, you must want to draw on that because you just created it inside of this feature, which is what I wanted to do. And if I didn't want to do that, I could always hit sketch setup and I can change that. But you can see it added that datum in as my sketch plane. So now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to hit right click, hold it down, click references. I'm going to add the edge of this as a reference. And then I'm going to hit close. So now I just need to create my keyway shape. So I'm going to create a circle. There's the top of my keyway. It's rounded at the end. I'm going to pick a line. I'm going to go from the left side down, over, up to a tangent point there. And we can see that that line is not currently vertical, so we'll just fix it. So I'll go up to vertical, and I'll say I want this line to be vertical. Just like that, it's fixed. Okay? So then we'll go delete segment, and we're going to draw a little, I like to draw a line because I can get rid of everything at once. But you could also just go through with delete segment and click, click. But if you click if you were to click with delete segment somewhere where there's not an entity and drag while you're holding down the left mouse button, you can get rid of that. But be careful, because if I accidentally drew this up and I went through the center, that's going to get rid of maybe some stuff I didn't want to get rid of. In this case, is stuff I did want to get rid of. So now I can add some dimensions in. I'm going to add a dimension across the width. And I'm going to add a dimension to the end. I'm actually going to have to go back in the tutorial here because it doesn't look like on this drawing they indicated necessarily how deep the keyway is or how long it is for that matter. So if I go back to my other tutorial here, go ahead and try and find that. So let's see where we cut the keyway. It's a 0.1 radius there, it's 0.4 to there, and 0.2 deep. Okay. So we'll get rid of this one. We'll click that line, delete it. And we'll go dimension. We'll go from here to here. I'm going to middle click to get out of the dimension command. I'll delete this one down here. I'll add a radius up here. So this one's going to be 0.1. This one's going to be 0.4. Okay, that looks pretty good. So now I can go ahead and hit my checkbox. If I rotate my screen, I can see that it's cutting upward. I want to flip the direction. I want to make it a cut. And then I'm going to make the depth 0.2. And we can see there's our nice keyway. That's excellent. It's 0.2 from the top. Not necessarily how I would create this keyway, to be honest with you, but this is the way it makes it in the tutorial, so we'll stick with that. So I'm going to hit the checkbox. And now I have my keyway in there. Let me go back over here. And I'm looking at this, and it looks like actually this keyway is cut in a little bit less than I had. The depth is actually 0.1. So you know what? This will give us a good opportunity. Hover over your keyway, double click it, and I can just change that dimension right here, 0.1 for my depth, and just go up here, hit the regeneration tool. Okay, so I'm going to save the shaft. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is put in those holes that are around the outside. So here's how I would do that. I would create a hole. I would pick this surface because that's where I want to drill into. And we're going to create, so I'm going to hit placement over here. We're going to create it on a diameter because when you have a radial hole pattern, you usually put it on a diameter. So I'm going to put a diameter in, and then I'm going to click in my offset references box. Now holding control, I'm going to pick my axis. There's my diameter. See that right there. And then I also need a plane to indicate what angle it's at. So I'm going to hold control and pick my front plane. Now my hole shows up there. Okay. So now I can go through and change all these things. So the diameter is 0.375. It's going to go through all, which is this one right here. And then my diameter looks like it's 2. My angle will be 45, okay, because they're clocked 45 degrees away from this keyway. Now I can hit my checkbox. The hole goes through, okay, and it's in the right location. Now I need to pattern this because I'm going to need 4 of these. Best way to do that, I'm going to right-click hole. I'm going to click pattern. I'm going to, up in the top left, switch it to an axis pattern, which I like to use for bolt patterns, much more efficient. I'm going to pick my axis. You can see it shows it in all 4 of these. I'll show you one more change that you don't necessarily have to do that I do like to make. I like to hit this angle up here and switch it, so instead of giving the angle in between, and that might matter if you have a pattern where you need to indicate that, you would want that on, but these are equally spaced, so I can say that in my note. And I'm going to hit this angle, and now it's going to automatically spread them around 360. I'll show you what I mean. So let's say I made 5. You can see those are nice and equally spaced still. So I want 4. I'm going to hit my checkbox. There's my 4 holes. And then I have one more feature that I need, which is a nice little round on both sides of that flange to give it a little bit of structural strength. So I'm going to say round. I'm going to hold control. I'm going to pick this edge right here, rotate it around, hold control, pick the other edge as well. And the size of this guy, I can click it right here, or I can go up here, is 0.02. It's a little tiny round there. Okay, then I'm going to hit my checkbox. I'm going to rotate it back to standard orientation because I like to have things in standard orientation. I'll turn my datum planes off so you can see it. All right, and now I can save my shaft, and I'm done with the first part. So part 2 will create the drawing for this shaft as well. All right.